They locked me in the dog shed. The smell of dirt and wet hay filled my nose as I struggled against the heavy chain across the door. I banged my fists against the wooden walls, shouting until my voice cracked, but no one came to help. My own family had done this to me, my son, his wife, and even my own grandchildren. They said it was for my own good. But I knew the truth. Through the cracks of the shed, I saw the papers in their hands, the inheritance papers my late husband left behind. They wanted me to sign everything away, to hand over the house, the land, and the savings I had spent a lifetime working for. They thought they had trapped me, thought they had broken me down enough to make me surrender. But what they didn't know was that I had already prepared for this day. I had a plan. One signature, just one, and everything would turn in my favor. And so while they believed they were outsmarting me, I lifted the pen with trembling fingers, smiled to myself, and signed something they never expected. That was the moment everything changed forever. But before I tell you what happened after that signature, let me take you back to the beginning. How I, a 74-year-old grandmother from North Carolina, ended up locked in a dog shed by the very people I loved most. Oh, before I continue, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Margaret. I'm 74 years old, and I live in the quiet countryside of North Carolina here in the United States. If you're new here, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another one of my stories. And tell me in the comments below from which part of the country, or the world, you're watching this from. I always love reading where my viewers are tuning in from. Now let me begin from where it all started. Life used to be peaceful after my husband, George, passed away. He left me with enough to live on comfortably, a beautiful farmhouse, and the land we had built together over 50 years of marriage. My son, David, and his wife, Linda, lived just a few miles away. They would often visit, bringing the children, Ethan and Sophie, who filled my heart with joy. At least, that's what I thought. But slowly, things began to change. David would come less often, Linda would give excuses, and when they did visit, their words carried a different tone. Linda especially started asking questions, about the house, about the land, about my savings. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just normal curiosity. But deep inside, I began to feel the shift. One winter evening, David showed up alone. His face was tense, and his eyes didn't meet mine as he sat across from me at the kitchen table. He cleared his throat and said, "Mom, you know it's getting harder for us. The kids need better schools, and Linda's been talking about moving to a bigger city. You're alone here, and this place, well, it's too much for you." I frowned. "David, are you suggesting I sell the farm?" He didn't answer right away. He just rubbed his forehead, then whispered, "It would help everyone, Mom." I felt my heart sink. This land wasn't just dirt and wood, it was my life. George and I had raised our family here. Every corner of this house told a story. To give it away felt like losing him all over again. I shook my head. "I'm not selling, David. I'll manage just fine." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He left soon after, and I thought the matter was closed. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. The pressure grew over the months. Linda would drop hints during her rare visits, saying things like, "This land would be worth so much in the city market." Or, "Think about the children's future, Margaret." Ethan and Sophie, sweet as they were, started acting differently too. They stopped calling me grandma, and instead repeated things I knew came straight from Linda's lips. "You should move into a smaller place. This house is too old. Too big." My heart broke a little more each time. But nothing compared to the day they cornered me. It was a warm spring afternoon when David came by with the whole family. At first, I thought they had finally decided to spend some time with me. We had lunch together, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe things were normal again. But then after the meal, David asked me to come outside. "We need to show you something," he said, holding a folder in his hand. I followed, confused, until we reached the dog shed at the back of the property. The next thing I knew, they shoved me inside, slammed the door, and locked it from the outside. I pounded against it in shock, crying out, "David! Linda! What are you doing?" Linda's voice was cold as it came through the wooden door. "Just sign the papers, Margaret. Everything will be easier for everyone. Stop being so selfish." I collapsed against the hay-strewn floor. tears burning my eyes. Selfish? After everything I had given? After all the sacrifices I had made? But as the hours passed and I sat in the darkness, a fire began to burn inside me. If they thought I would simply surrender, they had underestimated me. I wasn't just a grandmother. I was Margaret, the same woman who had built this life from nothing, who had endured loss, hardship, and struggle, and who had survived it all. I had one card left to play, and when I signed my name, it wouldn't be on the paper they thought. Little did they know, the trap they set for me was about to snap shut on them instead. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I heard footsteps approaching the shed again. The lock rattled. The door creaked open, and what I saw standing there froze my blood. The shed door creaked slowly, letting in a sliver of sunlight that cut across the dark, dusty floor. My heart pounded in my chest. For a moment I hoped it was a neighbor who had heard me shouting. But as the door swung open wider, my hope died. It was Linda. Her red-painted lips curled into a thin smile, and in her hand she held the folder of papers. Behind her stood David, his face hard, eyes cold. And then, my sweet grandchildren, Ethan and Sophie, peeking from behind their parents with curious eyes. "Are you ready to sign now?" Linda asked, her voice sharp like the snap of a whip. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "You can't do this to me. I am your mother, David. And you?" I turned my eyes toward Linda. "You are supposed to be part of this family. Do you have no shame?" Linda's smile didn't fade. Instead, she stepped closer, waving the papers in front of me. "This is for the best. You're old, Margaret. What do you need with land and property? David and I will take care of everything. You'll thank us later." David's voice was softer, almost guilty, but it still cut deep. "Mom, just sign it. Please. Don't make this harder than it has to be." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. The children whispered to each other, their voices carrying a tone of confusion more than cruelty. They didn't understand what was happening. I pressed my lips together, staring at the pen Linda thrust toward me. My hands trembled, not because I was weak, but because of the storm of anger and betrayal raging inside me. They had trapped me in the dog shed like an animal, all for money. I wanted to scream, to lash out. But instead, I took a deep breath. And then, I did something they didn't expect. I reached out and took the pen. Linda's smile widened, her eyes glinting with greed. David let out a sigh of relief. "Good," he murmured. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already prepared for this moment weeks ago. I had visited my lawyer in town and drawn up a new will. A will that left the farm, the house, and every last dime not to David or Linda, but to the one person who had stood by me when no one else did. My niece Clara. Clara was the daughter of my late sister, and she had been more of a child to me than David had ever been. She visited me often, helped me with groceries, called me every evening just to check in. I trusted her. And so I had made her the heir to everything. The paper they wanted me to sign was worthless compared to the one safely stored in my lawyer's office. But still I decided to play along. With shaky fingers I bent over the papers, letting my pen scratch across the lines. I didn't write my real signature. Instead, I scribbled a mess of lines, quick and illegible, but to their greedy eyes it looked like compliance. Linda snatched the papers from my hands before I could even set the pen down. She clutched them to her chest like treasure. "Finally," she cried. "You should have done this sooner, Margaret." David said nothing. He just stood there, his shoulders sagging, his face pale. Deep down I could tell. He knew this wasn't right. But he didn't stop her. The children giggled, not knowing the weight of what had just happened. And as Linda turned to leave, slamming the shed door behind her, I leaned back against the wall and whispered to myself, "The game has only just begun." I knew the false signature wouldn't hold up in court. I knew the will in my lawyer's office would crush their little scheme. But I also knew this wasn't over. Linda wouldn't stop until she had every last piece of me. And I wasn't about to let her win. The hours dragged on in the shed. I could hear their voices outside, arguing, celebrating, planning what they would do with their new property. My stomach twisted with anger, but also with a creeping fear. Because if they were willing to lock me away like this, what else might they do to me? Just as that thought struck me, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway echoed outside. tires crunching on gravel, a door slamming. My heart leapt. Could it be Clara? Or a neighbor? The voices outside grew tense. I heard Linda hiss, "Don't let them see her," and David's hurried footsteps moving toward the shed. The lock rattled again. The door burst open. And standing there this time, wasn't David, wasn't Linda. It was someone I never expected to see again. The sunlight blinded me for a moment as the shed door swung open. I squinted, raising my hand to shield my eyes. And when my vision cleared, my heart nearly stopped. Standing there was my brother, Thomas. I hadn't seen him in over 15 years. We had parted ways after a bitter argument about family property long ago. And he had disappeared from my life without a word. I never thought I would see him again. Not after all the silence and bitterness. And yet, there he was, tall and broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray in his hair, staring down at me with a look I couldn't quite read. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is it really you?" He stepped inside the shed, glancing around at the dirt floor, the chains on the door, and then back at me. His jaw clenched. "What on earth have they done to you, Margaret?" Before I could answer, Linda's sharp voice cut through the air. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" She stormed up behind him, her eyes flashing with anger. David trailed behind her, looking nervous, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. Thomas turned to face them, his presence towering, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I came to visit my sister. But instead I find her locked up in a shed like some animal. Care to explain that?" Linda laughed, though it was brittle and forced. "Don't be dramatic. She was only resting here for a while. She agreed to sign the papers. Isn't that right, Margaret?" Her eyes darted back to me, daring me to deny it. I met Thomas's gaze, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. "They forced me, Thomas. They locked me in here until I signed. That's the truth." Thomas's face darkened. His fists tightened at his sides. "David, is this true?" David shifted uncomfortably. "Dad." His voice cracked, and I realized he was speaking to Thomas not as an uncle, but as his father. I froze. The room seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat. "Dad." I whispered again, my eyes darting between them. Thomas's eyes flickered with guilt, then softened as he looked at me. "I never told you, Margaret. Years ago, when you and George had your troubles, Linda and David came to me for help. I stepped in more than I should have. And now, it looks like my mistakes have come back to haunt us all." My knees felt weak. Betrayal upon betrayal, secrets stacked like bricks crushing me down. My own son had hidden this from me. That Thomas was more than just my estranged brother, that he had become tied to my family in ways I never imagined. Linda folded her arms, smirking. "It doesn't matter what she says now. The papers are signed. This house and land belong to us. So why don't you leave, Thomas, before you get involved in something you don't understand?" Thomas stepped forward, his face inches from hers. His voice was low, dangerous. "I understand enough. And I'll tell you this, Linda. If you lay another hand on my sister, you'll regret it." The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. David looked pale, torn between loyalty to his wife and the shame in his eyes. The children stood behind them, silent now, their eyes wide with fear. I tried to stand, but my legs shook beneath me. "Thomas, what are you going to do?" He looked at me, then back at them, and his voice came out steady as stone. "I'm going to fix this. I should have done it a long time ago." But before he could say more, Linda suddenly screamed. We all spun around. The children were pointing toward the road. A dark SUV had pulled up at the edge of the property, its windows blacked out. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off. The doors opened, and 3 men in dark suits stepped out. Linda gasped, her face going pale for the first time. David stumbled backward. Even Thomas stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for me as though to shield me. Because whoever those men were, it was clear. They hadn't come for a friendly visit. And as they began walking toward us, slow and deliberate, a cold chill ran through my veins. Something far worse was about to begin. The 3 men in dark suits walked slowly up the gravel path, their polished shoes crunching against the stones. They didn't smile, they didn't speak, and their eyes never left us. Linda's face drained of color. She clutched the folder with the papers tight against her chest, her hands shaking. David instinctively pulled Ethan and Sophie behind him, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Why are they here, Linda? Did you?" Linda didn't answer. Thomas stepped in front of me, his shoulders squared, his voice like iron. "Stay behind me, Margaret." The men stopped a few feet away. One of them, tall and broad with a scar running down his cheek, spoke first. His voice was deep, steady, and frighteningly calm. "Mrs. Carter," he said, addressing Linda, "we've come for what was promised." The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to look at Linda, my heart pounding. She was trembling now, her lips pressed tight, eyes darting everywhere except at me. "What is this, Linda?" Thomas demanded. His voice was cold. "What did you do?" Linda's hands tightened on the folder and finally she snapped. "I had no choice. We owe them money. A lot of money. The house, the land. It was the only way out." My chest tightened. So that was it. This wasn't about family or even greed. She had dragged my son and grandchildren into some kind of dangerous debt, and now she wanted to use my inheritance to pay it off. The man with the scar stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the ground. "You said the property would be signed over today. Do not make us wait." Linda thrust the folder out toward him, desperation in her eyes. "Here. It's done. She signed it. The house is yours now." I couldn't help it, I laughed. A bitter, broken laugh that echoed through the tension. "You fool. That paper won't save you. You think I'd hand over my life so easily? That signature is worth nothing." The men's eyes shifted to me. Cold. Calculating. Scarface tilted his head. "Is that true?" I met his gaze, fear tightening in my chest, but I didn't waver. "The will is already secured with my lawyer. This house will never belong to you. Not now. Not ever." Linda's face twisted with rage. "You lying witch!" she shrieked, lunging toward me. Thomas caught her arm, pushing her back with one swift motion. David stood frozen, torn in two, his voice barely a whisper. "Linda, what have you done?" The men exchanged a look. Their leader gave a short nod, and the others moved closer. "If the papers are no good, then we'll need another form of payment," Scarface said softly. Too softly. My blood ran cold. Thomas stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're not taking anything. Not from her. Not from this land." Scarface's lips curled into the faintest smile. "We don't need the land, old man. We'll take her instead." He pointed at me. For a moment no one breathed. Linda gasped. David's eyes widened. Even Thomas froze. And then in one swift motion, the men surged forward. Thomas tried to block them, but one shoved him hard to the ground. I screamed as another grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the door of the shed. The last thing I saw before being dragged into the sunlight was Ethan and Sophie crying out, their small voices filled with terror. And then the black SUV's door swung open. The men's grip on my arms was like steel, their fingers digging into my skin as they dragged me across the gravel. My feet scraped against the ground, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The black SUV loomed ahead like a beast waiting to swallow me whole. "No. Let her go," Thomas roared, scrambling to his feet. He lunged at the man dragging me, tackling him to the ground. They rolled across the dirt, fists flying, grunts and curses filling the air. David stood frozen for only a moment before something seemed to snap inside him. "Mom!" he cried out, rushing forward. He grabbed the arm of the second man and tried to pull him back, but the man swung hard, knocking David to the ground with a brutal punch to the face. Linda screamed, her voice shrill with panic. She clutched the folder to her chest like it would save her, backing away from the chaos, her eyes darting wildly. Ethan and Sophie were crying now, their voices breaking my heart as they shouted, "Grandma! Grandma!" I twisted and fought, but the third man shoved me hard against the SUV, pinning me with his weight. His breath was hot against my ear as he hissed, "Stop fighting. You're coming with us one way or another." Fear clawed at my chest, but something else rose with it, a fierce, burning anger. I was 74, but I wasn't helpless. I slammed my foot down hard on his instep. He shouted, loosening his grip just enough for me to twist free. I stumbled forward, gasping for breath, and for a brief, wild moment I thought I might escape. But then Scarface himself stepped in front of me, blocking my path. He grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip so tight I thought my bones would snap. "You're wasting my time, old woman," he growled. "Get in the car." And then out of nowhere a loud bang split the air. Everyone froze. Scarface's head jerked up. The other men stopped mid-fight. Even Thomas and David stilled, their fists raised. Another bang followed, louder, closer this time. And then I saw it. At the edge of the property, Clara's old pickup truck came barreling down the driveway, dust flying behind it. The sound of her shotgun echoed again as she fired into the air, leaning out the driver's side window. "Let her go," Clara screamed, her voice carrying across the yard like thunder. Scarface's grip tightened on me, his eyes narrowing as he calculated his next move. His men exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence faltering. Linda's face went pale. "Oh no, not her," she whispered. Clara's truck screeched to a stop. She jumped out, the shotgun steady in her hands, her eyes blazing with fury. She looked at me, then at them, and her voice shook with rage. "You touch my aunt again, and I swear I'll drop every last one of you where you stand." The yard fell silent, everyone frozen in the standoff. Scarface tilted his head, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "So this is the niece." He released one hand from my shoulder and raised it slowly, pointing right at Clara. "Then maybe," he said softly, "we take her instead." The air was so still I could hear the pounding of my own heart. Clara stood firm, her shotgun aimed squarely at Scarface, her hands steady despite the danger. The men shifted uneasily, their confidence rattled by her sudden arrival. "Over my dead body," Clara said, her voice cold and steady. "You're not taking her, and you're sure as hell not taking me." Scarface chuckled, low and dangerous. "That can be arranged." Before he could move, Clara fired. The blast echoed like thunder, the recoil jolting her shoulder, and the shot ripped into the ground just inches from his feet. Dust and gravel sprayed the air. The men flinched back instinctively. Scarface didn't, but his smile faltered, the arrogance in his eyes dimming for the first time. "Next one," Clara hissed, "goes through your chest." Behind her, Linda shrieked, clutching the folder like a shield. "Clara, stop this. You're making everything worse. We had a deal." Clara spun on her, fury burning in her eyes. "A deal? You tried to sell off Aunt Margaret's life to some thugs just to cover your dirty debts? You're pathetic, Linda." David stumbled to his feet, his lip bleeding, his voice hoarse. "Clara, please don't shoot. The kids." "The kids wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't listened to her," Clara snapped, her gun never wavering. Thomas moved to Clara's side, his eyes locked on the men. "We have to end this now. They won't stop." Scarface raised his hands slowly, mockingly, as if surrendering. But his eyes glittered with malice. "You think a little girl with a gun can scare us off? We've handled worse." Clara cocked the shotgun again, the metallic sound sharp in the silence. "Try me." For a tense moment, no one moved. Even Ethan and Sophie had stopped crying, their wide eyes darting between the gun and the men, their small hands clutching David's legs. Then everything erupted at once. One of the men lunged at Clara from the side. Thomas tackled him midair, both of them crashing hard onto the dirt. Another man tried to grab me again, but David, my son, my foolish, broken son, threw himself at him, fists flying. Scarface lunged for Clara's gun. They wrestled for control, the barrel jerking wildly as they struggled. Clara gritted her teeth, refusing to let go. And then bang! The gun went off. For a moment, the world went silent. I blinked, my ears ringing from the blast, my eyes searching wildly. And then I saw it. The shot hadn't hit Scarface. It hadn't hit any of his men. It had hit someone else. Someone who crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain. Linda. The folder slipped from her hands, fluttering uselessly to the dirt as she clutched her side, blood staining her blouse. "Linda!" David screamed, his voice breaking as he fell to his knees beside her. Ethan and Sophie wailed, rushing toward their mother. Clara froze, her face pale, the shotgun trembling in her hands. I didn't mean to." Scarface's smile returned, crueler than ever. Well, isn't this convenient? He sneered. Your little family is tearing itself apart for us. Makes my job much easier. He whistled sharply, and the other two men regrouped at his side. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, not for money anymore, but for destruction. And then Scarface pointed at me again. Take her, he ordered. Now. Scarface's command cracked through the chaos like a whip. The two men surged toward me again, their heavy boots pounding against the dirt. My body froze for a heartbeat, my mind screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me was the shed, to my left the SUV, and to my right, Linda, bleeding out on the ground while David and the children clung to her. Thomas tried to intercept the men, but one slammed him hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. He staggered back, coughing, his hands clutching his ribs. Clara aimed her shotgun again, but her hands were shaking, her face pale after what had just happened to Linda. Stay back, she shouted, her voice cracking. I'll shoot, I swear I will. Scarface just laughed, striding toward me with slow, deliberate steps. His eyes were locked on me, cold and merciless. You're worth more to me than this land ever was, he said softly, as if only I could hear him. One old woman can settle a lot of debts. My knees trembled. For the first time I felt truly powerless. And then David moved. He tore himself away from Linda and the children, his face streaked with sweat and blood, and hurled himself at Scarface with a guttural scream. The two collided hard, David's fists flying with wild, desperate strength. Get away from my mother, David roared. Scarface stumbled back under the onslaught, caught off guard by the ferocity of a man who had seemed so weak only moments before. The other two men turned to help, but Clara fired another shot into the ground, so close to their feet that dirt sprayed up into their faces. Don't even think about it, she yelled, her voice steadier this time. Thomas, still wheezing from the blow to his ribs, seized the moment. He grabbed a heavy wooden beam that had fallen near the shed and swung it with all his strength, striking one of the men across the back. The man dropped with a grunt of pain. The yard exploded into chaos. Shouts, cries, the sound of fists striking flesh. David and Scarface rolled across the ground, grappling violently. For a moment, it looked like David might actually have the upper hand. His face was twisted with rage and guilt, his fists slamming into Scarface's jaw again and again. But Scarface was no ordinary thug. With a growl, he surged upward, flipping David onto his back. He pressed a knee into David's chest, pinning him, his hand wrapping tight around David's throat. Pathetic, Scarface spat, tightening his grip. You think you can stop me? David! I screamed, my voice raw with terror. I tried to run forward, but one of the men grabbed me from behind, yanking me back. My nails dug into his arms as I fought, but he was too strong. Clara's shotgun swung toward him, but Scarface barked, "Shoot and he dies." His hand tightened on David's throat. David's face was turning red, his eyes bulging as he struggled for air. Clara hesitated, sweat dripping down her brow. Her finger trembled on the trigger. And then, in that split second of hesitation, Ethan did the unthinkable. My little grandson, no older than 10, ran forward with a rock clutched in his small hands. His face was streaked with tears, but his eyes blazed with courage. With a cry that shook me to my soul, he hurled the rock at Scarface's head. It struck with a sickening thud. Scarface roared, clutching his temple, his grip on David loosening. David gasped, dragging in precious air. The yard froze in shock. No one had expected it. Not Clara, not Thomas, not me. And certainly not Scarface. Slowly, he turned his head toward Ethan. His eyes burned with pure fury. And then, with a smile that made my blood run cold, he whispered, "The boy's next." Scarface's words hung in the air like poison. The boy's next. Ethan froze, the rock still clutched in his trembling hand. His small chest heaved with fear, but his chin stayed high. His eyes locked on the monster who now towered over him. "Stay away from him," I screamed, struggling against the man who still held me. My arms burned from fighting his grip, but I refused to stop. David, gasping for breath, tried to push himself up from the ground. "Don't touch him," he wheezed, his voice ragged. Scarface ignored us all. His attention was fixed solely on Ethan. He rose to his full height, His jaw clenched, blood trickling from the cut where the rock had struck him. Step by step he advanced toward my grandson. Sophie wailed, grabbing Ethan's arm and trying to pull him back. "Don't. Please don't," she cried, her little voice shattering my heart. Clara aimed the shotgun again, but Scarface's hand shot up in warning. "Pull that trigger, and the boy suffers first." Her finger trembled on the trigger. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then to me, her whole body shaking with indecision. Thomas staggered forward, the wooden beam still in his grip, but one of the men blocked him, slamming him hard against the side of the shed. Thomas cried out, the beam clattering from his hands as he struggled. Scarface crouched slightly, his cruel eyes level with Ethan's terrified face. "You've got spirit, boy," he murmured, his voice like venom. "But spirit doesn't keep you alive in this world." Ethan's lips trembled, but his voice made me both proud and terrified. "My grandma says people like you never win. She says evil always falls." Scarface's smile widened. "Then let's see if your grandma is right." He reached out, his massive hand stretching toward Ethan's small shoulder. And then David threw himself forward. With the last of his strength, my son lunged, slamming into Scarface with a force that sent them both sprawling to the ground. Scarface roared, twisting and striking, but David clung to him like a man possessed. "Run, Ethan," David shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Take your sister and run." Ethan grabbed Sophie's hand, tears streaming down both their faces, and together they sprinted toward the trees at the edge of the property. The men shouted, breaking formation, one racing after the children. Clara spun and fired, the blast hitting the dirt so close to his legs he stumbled back, howling in rage. Scarface and David rolled in the dirt, locked in a brutal fight. David's fists pounded again and again, his voice raw with anger and fear. "You'll never touch my kids." But Scarface was stronger. With a violent twist, he threw David off, slamming him hard against the ground. David cried out, the breath knocked from his lungs. Scarface rose, his chest heaving, his face twisted with rage. He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade glinting wickedly in the sunlight. I screamed, my voice tearing from my throat. "No. Don't." Scarface raised the knife high over David, his voice a growl. "Then I'll take you first, boy. In front of your precious mother." And just as the blade began to fall, another deafening gunshot split the air. Scarface froze. His eyes widened. Slowly he looked down. Blood spread across his side. Someone had hit him. But as he staggered, clutching his wound, I saw the smoking gun still raised, and it wasn't Clara's shotgun this time. It was Linda. She was on her knees, pale and shaking, her blouse soaked in blood from her own wound. But her hand gripped a small pistol I'd never seen before. Her eyes were wild with pain and fury as she whispered, "Don't you touch my family." Scarface's expression twisted into something I'll never forget. Shock, fury, and hate all at once. And then with a roar he turned his knife, not toward David anymore, not toward Ethan or Sophie, but straight toward Linda. Scarface roared like a wounded animal, his knife flashing in the sunlight as he charged toward Linda. She tried to fire again, her trembling hands squeezing the trigger, but the gun only clicked, empty. Her eyes widened with horror. She tried to scramble back, dragging herself across the dirt, but her injury slowed her. "Linda!" David screamed, throwing himself toward her. Thomas staggered forward too, clutching his ribs, but the second man shoved him back down. Clara swung her shotgun, aiming at Scarface, but his movement was too fast. For a heartbeat I thought it was over, that Linda would be cut down before our eyes. But then something changed. David hurled himself across the ground, wrapping his arms around Scarface's legs just as the knife arced downward. The blade slashed through the air, missing Linda's chest by inches and slicing into the dirt instead. Scarface growled in fury, yanking his leg, but David held on, screaming, "Run, Linda! Run!" Linda tried to crawl, her face pale, her breath shallow, but her wound was slowing her. Sophie's cries carried from the trees, Ethan tugging her farther into the woods, both children screaming for their parents. The yard was chaos. Clara fired again, forcing one of the men back. Thomas, beaten and bruised, grabbed the fallen wooden beam and swung it desperately, catching the second man across the shoulder. The man staggered but didn't fall. And in the center of it all, David and Scarface rolled violently, the knife glinting as they fought for control. I screamed, my voice breaking. "Stop this! Please!" But there was no stopping. Scarface slammed his fist into David's jaw. David reeled, dazed, and in that instant Scarface raised the knife again. His face twisted in fury, blood dripping from his wound where Linda had shot him. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I just knew I had to do something. My eyes darted to the ground. And there, near the shed, lay the folder of papers Linda had once clutched so desperately. The inheritance papers. An idea sparked in my mind. Wild, reckless, but maybe the only chance we had. I lunged forward, wrenching free from the man who had been holding me, surprising him with the strength born of pure desperation. I snatched the folder and screamed, "You want this? Then take it." I tore the papers into pieces, the scraps flying into the wind. Scarface froze for a split second, his eyes darting toward the fluttering pages, greed and fury colliding in his expression. "You!" he bellowed, his voice shaking with rage. That split second was all David needed. With a guttural cry, he twisted his body, slamming Scarface's wrist against the ground. The knife clattered away. David snatched it up, turning it in his hand. For the first time, Scarface looked uncertain. David raised the knife high, his chest heaving, his face streaked with blood and tears. But then he hesitated. His hand trembled, his eyes wide. Killing a man, even a monster, was something he had never done. "Do it, David," Thomas shouted hoarsely. "It's him or us." Scarface snarled, his eyes burning into mine. "He doesn't have the guts. None of you do." David's arm trembled harder, his knuckles white around the handle. And then, before he could decide, Scarface surged upward, his fist slamming into David's throat. David choked, his grip on the knife faltering. In one brutal motion, Scarface wrenched it free from his hand. He rose to his feet, towering over David, bloodied but unbroken. He raised the knife again, this time not hesitating. And he roared, "This ends now." The blade began to fall. And just then, another deafening gunshot exploded. Scarface staggered. His eyes went wide. He dropped the knife. Slowly, he turned toward the source of the shot. And standing there at the edge of the trees, was Ethan. The boy was holding the small pistol Linda had dropped earlier, his tiny hands shaking, smoke rising from the barrel. The world froze. Scarface stood there, blood spreading across his chest, his knife slipping from his fingers as his eyes locked on Ethan. The little boy's hands shook violently around the pistol, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done the unthinkable. "Ethan!" I whispered, my heart breaking and swelling with pride all at once. Scarface stumbled forward, his voice a guttural rasp. "You little rat!" His knees buckled, but with the last of his strength he lurched toward Ethan. David screamed, "No!" He threw himself at Scarface, tackling him to the ground before he could take another step. The knife skidded away into the dirt. Scarface wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "You'll regret this, all of you." His voice faded into a gurgle. And then silence. For the first time since the nightmare began, the yard was still. Ethan dropped the pistol, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. "Grandma, I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to stop." I rushed to him, pulling him into my arms, holding him so tightly I thought I'd never let go. "You saved us, my brave boy," I whispered through my own tears. "You did what you had to do." David crawled to Linda, clutching her hand. She was pale, weak, but alive. "Stay with me," he begged. "Don't leave us." She gave him a faint smile. "I couldn't let him hurt the children," she whispered. Thomas stumbled to my side, his body battered and bruised, but his eyes fierce. Clara dropped the shotgun, her whole body trembling as she sank into the dirt, sobbing uncontrollably. The men who had come with Scarface had fled into the woods the moment their leader fell. Cowards without their master. We were alive. But the price was heavy. I looked at the torn papers scattered across the ground. The inheritance they had tried to steal. Worthless now. What good was money when it had nearly cost us everything? As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, I realized something. They had trapped me in that dog shed thinking they could force me to sign away my life. They thought greed could break me. But they were wrong. Because true power wasn't in papers or wealth. It was in love. In family. In the courage to stand together even when the world tried to tear us apart. Sirens wailed in the distance. Finally, the police David had tried to call earlier were arriving. It was over. I gathered my family close. Ethan still shaking, Sophie clinging to my dress, David cradling Linda, Thomas leaning on Clara for support. We were bruised. We were broken. But we were together. And as I looked at Ethan, my sweet, brave grandson, I knew he would never be the same. None of us would. But he had proven something that day. Even the smallest flame of courage can light up the darkest night. I turned to the camera in my mind. The way I always do when I share my story. My name is Margaret, I said softly, my voice steady now. I am 69 years old, from Texas. And this was the day they trapped me in a dog shed to steal my inheritance. But I outsmarted them with one signature. I leaned forward as if speaking directly to every listener's heart. Please, my dear ones, don't let greed destroy your family. Don't let betrayal win. And remember, no matter how dark it gets, courage will always find a way. I smiled faintly through my tears. You would think after Scarface collapsed in the dirt, after his men scattered into the woods, that our nightmare had ended. But life has a cruel way of reminding you, it's never over that easily. The police finally arrived, their cars pulling up with sirens wailing, their red and blue lights flashing across the broken yard. Officers rushed in, guns raised, ordering us to the ground until they sorted out who was who. Please, I shouted, my voice hoarse. We're the victims. We were attacked. David, still clutching Linda's bloody hand, cried out for help. Two paramedics sprinted forward, kneeling beside her, pressing gauze against her wound as they lifted her onto a stretcher. Sophie screamed when they took her mother away, but Ethan held her tight, his little face pale and hollow. That boy had been forced to do what no child should ever have to do. And though he had saved us, I could see it in his eyes. The weight of it was already sinking into him. As the officers examined the yard, one of them approached me. He was tall, with a trimmed mustache and hard eyes. His badge read Sheriff Caldwell. Ma'am, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. We need to know what happened here. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, Clara burst out, pointing at me with shaking hands. It was her fault. All of this, it's because of her inheritance. If she had just signed it over, none of this would have happened. The sheriff turned to me, frowning. Inheritance? The yard went silent. My children looked at Clara with wide eyes, shocked at her words. I took a deep breath. Yes, that man, Scarface, and his crew, they came for my inheritance. But don't be fooled, Sheriff. He didn't act alone. The sheriff's gaze swept across the yard, his jaw tightening. Are you saying someone in your family was involved? The question cut through the air like a knife. Everyone stiffened. David's head whipped toward me, confusion on his face. Thomas flinched. Ethan looked between us all, his small hand clinging to my dress. And then Clara shouted again. Don't you dare look at me. I was trying to protect us. Her voice cracked, too loud, too defensive. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. Protect you or protect your share? I stared at her, my heart sinking. I had suspected it before, but now the truth was clawing its way to the surface. Clara's involvement wasn't small. It was bigger than any of us wanted to believe. The sheriff motioned for his deputies. Take her in for questioning. No, Clara screamed, thrashing as two officers grabbed her arms. You don't understand. I did it for us. For the family. Thomas stumbled forward. Clara, what did you do? His voice broke with betrayal. But Clara only cried harder, her words spilling like poison. He promised me. He promised if I helped, he'd let us live. And I'd get my share. I didn't know it would go this far. The sheriff looked back at me, his expression grim. Ma'am, this is bigger than a simple break-in. We'll need you to come down to the station. Because I think this inheritance of yours has painted a target on every last one of you. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought the danger had ended when Scarface fell. But now, with Clara's betrayal revealed, I realized something even worse. The true war for my inheritance was only just beginning. The cold steel of the sheriff's station felt nothing like the chaos of the yard. It was quiet here, almost too quiet, except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the low hum of voices from other rooms. But that silence was heavy, pressing down on me as if daring me to speak the wrong word. They separated us the moment we arrived. Thomas, David, Clara, even little Ethan. I wanted to scream when they tried to lead him away, but Sheriff Caldwell promised, "We'll keep him with one of our female deputies. He'll be safe." Safe. What did that word even mean anymore? I sat in a small room with a table bolted to the floor, staring at the scratched surface, my fingers trembling as I clutched the edge. A deputy set down a tape recorder, pressed a red button, and left. Moments later, Sheriff Caldwell himself entered, closing the door behind him. "Mrs. Margaret," he began, his voice calm but sharp, "I need you to tell me everything. Start to finish." I swallowed hard. "I told you already. They locked me in a dog shed. They wanted me to sign papers giving up my inheritance. And you refused," Caldwell said, pacing slowly. I nodded. "Until the end," he added, his eyes narrowing. "You said you outsmarted them with one signature. What did you mean by that?" My chest tightened. The memory of that moment in the shed burned bright in my mind. Scarface shoving the pen into my hand, demanding I sign. But instead of giving them what they wanted, I had written something else, something they never even noticed. "I didn't sign away my inheritance," I whispered. "I signed a decoy, a fake that meant nothing. It was my way of buying time." The sheriff studied me for a long moment. "Clever, but risky." I leaned forward, my voice firm. "I wasn't going to let greed steal what my late husband worked for. Not like that. Not with a gun at my head." The sheriff sat down across from me, folding his hands. "Do you know why they were so desperate? This wasn't a small job. From what we can tell, Scarface's crew came prepared. Someone paid them. Someone promised them more than just a cut." His eyes locked on mine. "Do you know who that someone was?" My heart thudded painfully. One name clawed at my mind, Clara. But was she truly the mastermind? Or just another pawn? Before I could answer, the door burst open. A deputy rushed in, breathless. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Caldwell stood quickly, frowning. "What is it?" The deputy handed him a folder, thick with documents. Caldwell flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages, and his face hardened. He slammed it shut. "Damn it." I gripped the edge of the table. "What is it? What did you find?" Caldwell's voice was low, grave. "Mrs. Margaret, the inheritance papers weren't just about land and money. There's a deed here. And according to this, your late husband owned property tied to a massive oil reserve. We're talking millions. Maybe billions." The room tilted around me. Oil. $1 billion oil. No wonder they wanted me dead. But before I could even process it, Caldwell added the words that froze my blood. "And the name listed as co-owner on these papers?" He paused, looking straight at me. "It's not just you. It's one of your children." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Which one of them? Thomas? David? Or Clara? The betrayal was deeper than I ever imagined. And before I could even ask, the sheriff's radio crackled. A voice shouted through the static. "Sheriff! Shots fired. Someone's trying to break into the evidence room." Caldwell's eyes widened. He grabbed his gun and barked, "Stay here." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me trembling in the interrogation room. But my gut already knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The walls of the interrogation room shook as a gunshot echoed through the sheriff's station. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I pushed against the table, desperate to run, desperate to see what was happening outside, but the heavy door was locked. Another shot rang out, followed by the sound of shouting deputies. "Stop him! Don't let him reach the files." The air felt heavy, suffocating. I pressed my ear against the cold door, straining to hear more. Footsteps thundered through the hall. Then silence. A silence so sharp it made my skin crawl. Moments later, the door burst open, and Sheriff Caldwell stormed in, his face red with fury. Behind him, 2 deputies dragged someone in handcuffs. And when I saw who it was, my knees buckled. Thomas. My son, my oldest boy, stood with his head bowed, his wrists chained in steel. His shirt was ripped, his lip bloody, and his eyes avoided mine. "No, no, this can't be," I whispered. Caldwell's voice was like a hammer. "We caught him trying to break into the evidence room. He wanted the deed, the oil papers. He nearly shot one of my men to get it." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No. Sheriff, you must be mistaken. Thomas would never." But before I could finish, Thomas finally raised his head. And the look in his eyes wasn't the look of an innocent man. It was guilt. Pure, undeniable guilt. "Mother," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I just wanted what was mine." His words stabbed me deeper than any knife. "Yours." My voice trembled. "Your father left everything to me, Thomas. You know that. Why would you?" "Because it isn't fair," he shouted, his voice echoing against the walls. "I was the one who stayed behind when Dad was sick. I took care of him while everyone else lived their lives. And when he died, I thought, finally, he'll recognize me. But no, he gave it all to you. And I got nothing." Tears blurred my vision. "So you sold us out? You worked with Scarface? You..." My throat closed up. "You nearly got Ethan killed." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I didn't know Scarface would go that far. I just wanted him to scare you. To make you sign. He wasn't supposed to hurt anyone." Caldwell slammed his fist against the table. "Enough. You think we're fools? We traced money transfers from your account, Thomas. You funded Scarface's crew. You're not just involved, you orchestrated it." I gasped, my chest heaving. My son, my own flesh and blood, had betrayed me. "Sheriff," Thomas pleaded, his voice desperate now. "Just let me explain. Please, I can fix this." But Caldwell only ordered the deputies. "Get him out of my sight." They dragged Thomas away, his cries echoing down the hall. I collapsed into the chair, my whole body trembling, my heart split in two. And then Caldwell looked back at me, his voice lower now. "Mrs. Margaret, I don't think you realize the storm you're in. If Scarface was willing to risk everything for this, and your son is tied to it, others will come. People far worse than Scarface." I stared at him, my tears streaming, my voice shaking. "How much worse can it get?" The sheriff leaned closer, his eyes grim. "Worse enough that you might lose more than just money. You might lose your entire family." I don't remember leaving the interrogation room. My body moved, but my mind was somewhere else. Stuck replaying Thomas's words, his face, his rage. My oldest boy. The one I once carried in my arms, sang lullabies to wipe tears for. The boy who had become the man standing in handcuffs, admitting he betrayed me. How did it come to this? The sheriff gave me a quiet ride home under police escort, but the silence in that car was louder than any gunshot. My home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a stranger's house. Inside, David paced the living room, his face pale. Clara sat stiff on the couch, her arms wrapped around Ethan, who looked small and confused, clutching his toy car. "Where's Thomas?" David asked the moment I walked in. I froze. My lips trembled, but no words came. "He was arrested," Sheriff Caldwell answered for me. "He's being charged for orchestrating the attack." The room fell into stunned silence. Ethan's small voice was the first to break it. "Uncle Thomas is a bad guy?" he asked innocently. Clara squeezed him tighter, whispering, "Don't say that, sweetheart." David shook his head violently. No, I don't believe it. Thomas wouldn't do that. He wouldn't." But his denial sounded weak. "He confessed." I whispered, my voice breaking. "He said he thought your father owed him. He worked with Scarface." David dropped into a chair, his face in his hands. "My God." Clara, however, didn't look surprised. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp and cold. "Are you sure it was only Thomas?" she asked. I stared at her, searching her expression. "What do you mean?" Clara leaned forward, her voice low. "If Dad's land has oil, like the sheriff said, then Thomas isn't the only one who knew. Those men weren't just thugs. They had information. Someone else fed them details. Someone close." Her words hung heavy in the air. David lifted his head, his voice hoarse. "Are you saying there's more than one traitor?" I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe the nightmare ended with Thomas. But deep in my bones I felt it. Clara was right. The shadows hadn't lifted. They were closing in tighter. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk staring at the inheritance papers, the cursed oil deed, the lines of my husband's handwriting. I remembered his voice, steady and calm, telling me on his deathbed, "Margaret, protect it. They'll come for it." At the time I thought he meant the land, the house, the money. I never dreamed he meant this. The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. I froze, my pen slipping from my fingers. Another crash followed, this one downstairs. Someone was inside the house. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding, rushing to Ethan's room first. Clara was already there, clutching him. David appeared from the hallway, holding a fireplace poker in his shaking hands. "Stay quiet," I whispered. But before we could even move, a shadow stretched across the hallway wall. Heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor. And then, a deep voice snarled from below, "Hand over the deed, Margaret, or this house burns." I gasped, my blood running cold. This wasn't Thomas. This was someone far more dangerous. The air turned thick with smoke as the intruder's voice echoed through my house. "Margaret, last chance. Bring me the deed, or we torch the place." Ethan whimpered in Clara's arms. David's hands shook so hard the fireplace poker clanged against the wall. I held my breath, forcing my mind to clear. If I panicked, we were all finished. I looked at them, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson, and something inside me hardened. "No one is taking this family from me," I whispered. I motioned for Clara to take Ethan into the closet. She hesitated, but the terror in my eyes convinced her. David stayed with me, though he looked like a man ready to break. Then I did the unthinkable. I walked to the top of the staircase, clutching the inheritance papers in my trembling hand. "I have it," I shouted down into the shadows. "But you'll have to come up here to take it." A figure stepped into view. Not Scarface. Not Thomas. A man in a black mask, tall and broad-shouldered, holding a gasoline can in one hand and a lighter in the other. His voice was calm, too calm. "Good. Make this easy on yourself, old woman." He started up the stairs. I waited until he was halfway up. Then I struck. I hurled the oil deed straight at his face. As he lifted his arm to block it, David swung the poker with all his strength. The blow knocked the gasoline can free, spilling its contents all over the steps. The smell hit me hard. "Now," I screamed. Before the masked man could react, I snatched the lighter from his stunned hand and flung it down the soaked stairs. Whoosh! Flames roared to life, swallowing the staircase in an inferno. The masked man staggered back, his screams swallowed by fire. The blaze cut him off from us completely, the heat forcing us back down the hall. "Upstairs window go," I shouted. We ran, the smoke choking us. Clara smashed a chair through Ethan's bedroom window, and one by one we climbed out onto the roof. Deputies' sirens wailed in the distance, the glow of their headlights cutting through the night. A ladder clattered against the roof, and Sheriff Caldwell's men pulled us down to safety. Behind us, my house burned. My memories. My home. Everything my husband built. Gone. But Ethan was safe. My family, what was left of it, was alive. As the firefighters battled the flames, Caldwell came to me, his face grave. That wasn't just some thug. That was a professional. Whoever sent him, they won't stop. I clutched Ethan's tiny hand, my heart still racing. "Then let them come. I'm done being hunted. This time I'll be ready." The sheriff nodded. "Then we'll fight back. Together." I looked at my grandson, his wide innocent eyes staring up at me, and I realized the truth. This inheritance wasn't about money. It wasn't about oil. It was about survival. About legacy. About teaching the next generation that family must be protected, no matter the cost. And though my heart ached with Thomas's betrayal, though my home was now ashes, I knew one thing with certainty. They trapped me in the dog shed. They tried to steal what was mine, but I outsmarted them with one signature, and I would do it again 100 times over, if it meant keeping my family safe. So to everyone listening to my story right now, thank you for walking this journey with me. Please make sure you subscribe, like this video, and click the notification button, because there are more stories coming that you won't believe. And before I go, I want to ask you, from which part of the country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments because I'd love to know where my family of listeners is tuning in from. Until the next story, stay safe, stay wise, and remember, not every smile is friendly, and not every family member can be trusted. Broken heart.